Thanks everyone for joining us again. Thank you for everyone who attended the Performance MDT. I'm glad to be joined by Tannath Scott now, who presented on the day. Thanks again for joining us to answer these questions from the audience, Tan. Would you mind
Awesome.
a brief couple of minutes summary about what you presented on for those people that missed out on it?
Yeah, so I try to look at or get a brief description of, I guess, in the applied world, what I've done in terms of testing, bang for buck with testing, trying to identify rationale behind what you are testing, and then how that funnels into the performance data that's coming in. Gave some, I guess, relevant descriptions, looking at some of our testing data that I've previously used in rugby league, how that drove our conditioning in particular, and then also our monitoring side of it. So talking in and around some maximal fitness testing, the data that comes in from that, and then how we use that to drive everyday decisions.
Brilliant, Tam. Thank you very much. And seem to get a good reception from the audience and that as well. So I'll start off with a few of the questions and feel free to answer them as in detail or as possible as you like. So number one, in terms of intensity prescription using VIFT, do you use absolute values like 85% for a long hit and work on overloading an athlete with volume modifications? Or, and this is a two-parter, the lovely two-parters, or do you use a relative intensity to prescribe, say, medium heavy theoretical, 85% of the 85% lift?
Cool. So I think what they're trying, or what this person is trying to ask, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what do we use as our anchor? Do we prescribe at a certain percentage and then use a certain percentage off the back of that across the squad? So I guess the easiest way to probably frame that is we utilize VIFT as our anchor. So 100% of VIFT would be, I guess, what we're working toward. In terms of the conditioning side of it, we've probably come and go on and change the model of how I've used it in the field. And I guess coming off the PhD and looking at this a lot, I was pretty heavy into it and used it quite substantially. And now I probably more cherry pick around what conditioning drills to do. So in terms of that, yes, it's anchored at 100% of VIFT. A lot of the work we'll do is probably 30-meter shuttles for rugby league. I'd imagine similar in rugby union. It's a distance where guys, you can work on some running mechanics. Guys are sitting in a reasonable posture through that, and we can get some nice high intensity running in there. So 30-meter shuttles, what we use, range from 80% through to 95%. Bit of a change around with work rest ratios, but that's the general framework. We used to muck around with 20-meter shuttles, 15-meter shuttles for a bit more, I guess, neuromuscular loading, high mechanical load in and out of those changes. But then we sort of drifted away and started to implement some other some other conditioning that hit that same sort of work. So it certainly can be used across that. Obviously, when you're using VIFT, because you're prescribing at an intensity, you're therefore prescribing at a relative load or volume as well. Obviously, someone that's running at a lower percentage is going to be running less volume. So they're sort of highly interrelated there. I think that sort of answers it. So yeah, we don't prescribe an intensity and then prescribe individuals off that intensity. It's all based on whatever we're looking at for the day.
Cheers, thank you very much, Dan. And I suppose linking in with that, I think I know the answer to this from some of the work that we've done. How reliable is the heart rate is within a contact sport? For example, how much missing data does he end up within a session?
Yeah, so we've actually written up, I think, some of our work, some of the stuff that hasn't been published yet. But you're looking at in rugby league around 23% when I look back through the numbers today. So that's fairly substantial. I know Heidi Thornton's published some work. I didn't look that up. I think it's around 25, 26%. That Heidi's found that they lost in rugby league as well. It's probably something that we could publish more of, or I guess be a bit more vocal about in and around this space. I saw this was sort of going off on Twitter, a bit of a thread on it a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, around that 23%. in terms of, I guess, strategies to minimise it, is that what you mentioned as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess getting the process sorted. So we use H1 polar clips and clip into their what was then GB Sports vest, with sort of the electrodes obviously in the vest. So one, making sure all the clips are clipped in prior to the players getting there, because they can be notoriously poor at getting them and getting them in, depending on how large a group you're working with, obviously. So we would sort of set that up. They'd already have like a bit of moisture there. We're lucky enough in Brisbane, when I was there, heat's not an issue. So guys are usually sweating pretty early, so you get pretty good transmission. The contact side of it is probably the biggest, I guess, downside of rugby league. And guys are probably, I don't know whether it's because they're using heart rate straps and clips earlier in their careers when they're sort of under 20s and in academies now, but they're getting far better at utilising them and it's just been part of their everyday kit later on. So there's not too many issues there. So that process is probably one of them, and just making sure that that's fine. Then the other side of it is we're looking at that transmission through the GPS unit. So there's error that comes with that as well. So I guess if you really wanted to look at it more in depth, having a system only, I saw a bit about that with people having a bit more luck, whether it be Polar Team or whatever you might use there. But yeah, we took it through the GPS. So there's going to be errors associated with that as well. Yeah, 22% is a lot when you sort of look at that, but I think that's the reality, and I don't think it's probably talked about enough. When you're looking at, say, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 sessions and a player is lost or can't be used, and then what do you do with that? Do you actually delete that data, or is that just sort of you tick that over in your head, or you don't look at it, and then it's sort of you're interpreting that information later on? So yeah, it's an interesting one, that.
Thank you, Ted. Question number 3. For your relative speed thresholds based on the 30-15 intermittent fitness test, are you using this speed to democrat? See, I even struggle to read that word now.
Good way for you, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. I need to up my game. So do you use that to define high speed running, and how often do you retest this?
Okay, cool. It is used to describe, I guess, it's what you call high speed running. It's used to describe high speed. And sorry, mate, can you pause it? Sorry, it's a recording.
So question number 3, Ty. So for your relative speed thresholds based on the 30-15 intermittent fitness test, are you using these speeds to actually quantify your high speed running thresholds for the players? And if so, how often do you use this?
Yeah, okay. So we use it to, I guess, this is probably a difference in terminology and how you define that, but I would quantify it as high speed and very high speed running as the two thresholds that sort of we utilise on that. So high speed running being an estimation of first ventilatory threshold from the 30-15, which is 68%. So it's a high speed running. It's pretty similar in the literature to I mean, even absolute speed thresholds vary that much across the industry. Then our very high speed running is 87% of VIFT. So our sprinting work is still prescribed off maximal velocity, and that's probably 2-part. We liked 80% of max velocity as a high speed tolerance, a distance, a volume marker that we sort of looked at. Which fits pretty nicely in the literature, and I'm sure a lot of people use the same. Billy Hewlin did some work out here on looking at fascicle lengths in rugby league players, and it was a determining factor in that. So that sort of fit some anecdotal evidence that we had in that space, and then we quantify high or sprinting exposure, which is 92%. Is how so all of it was individualized. I guess we looked at first and second ventilatory threshold or fitness characteristics, and then speed characteristics for our higher end work.
Thank you, Ted. And number 4, would it be possible to provide a little bit more detail on your anaerobic capacity test?
It certainly will. And rather than, I saw this question come through and I thought I'm not going to try to explain it because it is very difficult to explain. So I'm going to try to screen share this Davey, and let's see what we come out with. Have you got that, mate?
Yeah, the share screen's up and running.
Good. All right. This is my little color coding here. So essentially it's 12 seconds on, 36 seconds off. This is a little description here we did, I don't know, this is years and years ago now. So you can probably read through that while we do it. The only thing I probably noticed when I was sort of just looking at this a bit before was that we had 3-point stance, which that doesn't need to be the case. In fact, I think athletes are probably better without it. Rugby league athletes are anyway. So essentially what you do is you go up 10. So this would be your starting section. You'd have 5 people running in one test. All right, they all go up, back, up, cut, all right, across, and then they run back through here. You'd have a camera set up over this side, and you'd have cones along this 10 meters. So cones at every meter, a different colored cone, and a whistle going on the 12 seconds. Then the next group does the same thing, up, cut, back through. Next group, up, cut, back through. On the second attempt, you go the other way. So you'll just follow your lane. So if you're over here, your next one, you'll actually go there and come back through. If you're this athlete, you go up, back, across, and then down through here. So you have, 10 cones there. That's really poor color coding because there's only 4. But you sort of get the idea. You film it, whistle goes every 12 seconds. You go every 48 seconds. And what we then do is we break down that data or that vision, and we quantify how far you actually went in that effort. Essentially what an athlete has to do is they have to tick a certain box of their acceleration value. So based on pre-season testing, we have their 0 to 10 meter time. So they have to tick a certain percentage of that. I believe it's maybe 80%. I should have looked that up. I can find that if anyone wants that data, what actually threshold we use to determine a maximal effort or whether they're having a go. But it's based on their 0 to 10 time. And then assuming that they tick that box off, we looked at their decrement across those 8 efforts, 4 each way. So from their highest to their lowest effort. What that then determined is, again, depending on the percent decrement, I believe, again, sorry, I've put on pretty poorly here. I believe that was 5% decrement. So if you're greater than 5%, again, I can find that exact figure that we use, then you essentially went into a capacity group where part of the research stream, you redid that effort on similar work-rest ratios, and you ran an average of that effort. So if you got 54 meters as an average, then that's what you would do consistently. If you ran above the certain percentage of your acceleration, so from our point of view, you've given it a maximal effort, then and you had less than that identified percent decrement, then you went into an anaerobic power group where you ran continuous efforts at your maximal distance, but you had a larger work-rest ratio. So I think it was 12 seconds on, 48 off. So I'll stop sharing that. So yes, that probably gives you some context in and around that. Basically, if the athlete was able to repeat this high-intensity work, then they sort of went into a conditioning stream where they were able to work at their maximal capacity and try to repeat that. Otherwise, they went into an average capacity and had a decreased work-rest ratio.
I'd love to see some of your rugby league players doing some academic work and research work.
Yeah, I know. Oh, it's gold. Gold. Be better than me, in fairness.
You're not the only one. Better than me. So question number 5. Why do you use heart rate max percentage instead of absolute values when monitoring a single player changing? Yeah,
so that's probably, for multiple reasons. So I'm just going to change the screen. That's probably for multiple reasons. The first is, I guess, when you're looking at a typical error, having it standardized across a group of individuals makes that an easier process. rather than looking at a high range of beats per minute. Not impossible with the beats per minute, but just, I guess, the sensitivity of what we're trying to look at makes that a bit easier. Probably the biggest one is consistency in the language across the department. And we look at percent max heart rate for different thresholds in our, I'm saying we're losing 1 in every 4 bits of data, but we're still looking at above 90%. We've typically used, people use above 85%, but exposure to this high intensity work that we know elicits adaptations that are favourable for performance in team sport. So we're looking at that information and then having it standardised across that terminology is pretty integral, particularly when you're talking to athletes, you're talking to coaches. When you've got 40 athletes trying to remember what someone's max heart rate is and therefore what band that puts them in is difficult. I think when we're looking at things like submaximal work, we're trying to identify an outcome. So we're trying to standardise that response across individuals. And if you're working at 70% of your max heart rate versus someone who might be working at 90% of their max heart rate, and this is part of the argument that I'm sort of trying to propose for the individualised submax that we're doing, that we've looked at, is that there's different physiological systems or pathways that you're looking at there and identifying. So I guess it makes it easier to try to compare apples to apples across that process.
Well, thank you, Tan. We're going to skip on to question 7 just because reading question 6 again, it's just a reworded version of question 3. So last question, which test do you prefer using on pitch to reach VVO2 max?
It's I guess I'll probably frame it by saying we don't probably do an appropriate test for VVO2 max, and you can bastardize that term as much as you want. The test that probably comes closest to it is our 1.2 time trial, which if you do that in other sports, you're probably saying that is well over VVO2 max because, more endurance athletes are going to be able to complete that at a high capacity of that. For our sport, it's actually fairly similar, not that we've validated it against any lab testing. But I looked at a couple of numbers a couple of years ago. So I guess in the literature, VIFT is generalized at about 120% of your VVO2 max. And that's going to change depending on what qualities you have and capacities that you can translate to the 30-15, recovery ability, change direction ability, things like that. With our guys, it was pretty similar. So it was about 100 and VIFT was about 116% of their VVO2 or their 1.2 time trial. So it suggests that we're probably looking at similar constructs there in terms of our 1.2 aerobic testing. That's probably the closest that we've come. But in saying that, when I've looked at guys, like some guys, their 30-15 score is the same as what they do a 1.2K time trial in terms of the velocity at the end of that versus the average velocity through that running, which doesn't make sense. It just shows that you've got a different athlete, which is sort of what I was talking about with that individual conditioning drills. And then some guys are upwards of their VIFT is 140, 145% of their 1.2 time trial. So yeah, that's the best test we use. Again, that data just in a nutshell shows that the reason why you need to individualize across different constructs that you are trying to test, whether that be cardiopulmonary response, neuromuscular response, the ability to recover, because different athletes are going to have different strengths. And whether or not you want to try to improve those strengths or try to, I guess, improve a minimum threshold that you might have for those weaknesses. But that's probably the best one we have. That's going to be very specific to our cohort of athletes, though.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Tan. I really appreciate your time to answer all those questions.
Oh, good, mate.
If anyone's got any other questions for you, like what's the best way for them to reach you?
Where to reach me, sorry?
Where to reach you, so social media?
So you can shoot me an email. That's tannath.scott@une.edu.au. Otherwise, I think my Twitter handle is Tannath Scott, TANNATH. You'll never have to call me that again. Tannath Scott. So you can reach out to me on those. I'm more than happy to get back to everyone and anyone that reaches out. and yeah, and have a yarn.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time again, Tan, and thank you to
Good,
everyone
man.
for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. See you, buddy. Bye.